The morning sky over the Blackwell estate was a pale, cold blue, the kind that made every shadow seem sharper and every sound more pronounced. Ethan stood in his study, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, staring out through the tall windows that framed the frost-dusted garden. The silence of the house was deceptive. It was the kind of stillness that carried weight, like a pause before a verdict. He had called the evaluation without warning, and now that the call had been made, he felt the faintest ripple of unease in his chest. It was not that he doubted Emily's progress. He had seen with his own eyes the way her face lit up when she felt something new, the way her posture seemed stronger, but the accusations swirling from the outside world, the constant whispers in his social circle and Lucille's unyielding reminders of liability had worn on him. He told himself that this was for Emily's benefit, that a full neurological assessment would give them a clear medical baseline. Yet beneath that rationale was something harder to admit. Part of him wanted proof that the hope Maya had ignited wasn't just a flicker born out of desperation. Maya walked into the study with the same calm step she always had, her face composed though her mind was spinning. She had heard the tone in his voice over the intercom, a clipped, business-like summons that carried no warmth, and had steeled herself for another round of being reminded of her place. The faint scent of leather and polished wood filled the room, and the only sound for a moment was the tick of the antique clock above the mantel. Ethan didn't offer her a seat at first. Instead, he moved behind his desk, his posture as straight as if he were preparing to negotiate a deal rather than speak about his daughter. "I'm having Emily evaluated," he said without preamble, his voice steady but not unkind. "A full neurological workup? The team from Northridge Medical will arrive tomorrow." Maya felt a low thud in her stomach. She had heard of Northridge, a cutting-edge rehabilitation center, known for its state-of-the-art equipment and the kind of specialists who charged more for an hour than most people earned in a week. But she also knew their reputation for clinical detachment. They worked with data, not children. Evaluated for what? She asked slowly, though she already knew the answer. "For confirmation," Ethan replied, folding his hands on the desk. "I've seen the changes, yes, but I need verified data. Documented. If we move forward with more aggressive therapy, I want to know the progress is measurable, not just observed." Maya stood very still, her eyes never leaving his. "You already have measurements. Every session I've done with her is recorded in detail. You've seen the notes. You've seen her move." "I've also seen the fallout from that photograph," Ethan said, his tone tightening. "The speculation. The questions about my judgment, about yours. The more public this becomes, the more scrutiny we face. I need to be certain medically. Certain that her progress is real." For a long moment, Maya said nothing. She could feel the heat of frustration rise inside her, but she refused to let it spill into her words. "And if they don't see it?" she asked at last. Ethan hesitated, and in that pause lay the weight of the unspoken truth. If the team from Northridge didn't confirm what he'd witnessed, Maya's place in this house would become more tenuous than ever. "Then we reassess," he said finally. "For her sake." Maya drew in a slow breath, steadying her voice. "I will agree to the evaluation, but I want to be in the room when they work with her. She trusts me. If she sees me there, she push herself harder. Without that, you'll get half the truth at best." His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in consideration. He knew she was right. Emily's breakthroughs were fragile, like the first. Green shoots after a long winter. They needed care, familiarity, a sense of safety. After a long moment, he gave a short nod. "Fine, you'll be there, but you will not interfere." Maya accepted the condition without argument. She turned to leave, but at the door she paused, glancing back at him. "Mr. Blackwell, I know. You think this is about data, but it's also about belief. If you go into that room looking only for numbers, you'll miss what really matters." When she was gone, Ethan stayed seated at his desk for a long time, staring at the polished surface as though it might yield answers. Ruth's voice echoed in his memory about walls, about bridges, about the risk of tearing them down. He exhaled, long and slow, before reaching for the phone to confirm the evaluation schedule. The next morning, The estate was unusually quiet for an event of such importance. No press, no guests, no unnecessary staff in sight. Just the core team from Northridge. Arriving in 2 black SUVs, their logo understated but unmistakable on their jackets. They moved with the brisk efficiency of people accustomed to working under pressure, rolling in cases of specialized equipment and setting up in the sunlit conservatory, which Ruth had insisted was warmer and less intimidating than the sterile therapy room. Maya wheeled Emily in just after 10. The girl was dressed in soft gray, her hair brushed back neatly, her eyes bright but wary. She looked around at the unfamiliar faces, then at Maya. The unspoken question in her gaze was clear. "Are you staying?" Maya nodded, moving to stand just off to the side. The lead specialist, Dr. Helena Voss, introduced herself with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're here to assess muscle response, nerve conduction, and sensory perception. It won't be painful, Emily. Just a series of small tests. Is that all right?" Emily's voice was quiet but certain. "Okay." For the next hour, they worked methodically, tapping along nerve pathways, applying light pressure, asking Emily to identify sensations. Maya kept her eyes on the girl's face, watching every flicker of reaction, every shift in her breathing. When Dr. Voss placed a small vibrating probe against Emily's ankle, the girl's eyes widened just slightly. "I felt that," she whispered. Dr. Voss made a note without looking up. "On a scale of 1 to 10? 3, Emily replied. Maya couldn't help the faint curve of her lips. It wasn't the number that mattered, it was the certainty in Emily's tone. By the end of the session, the Northridge team had pages of readings and recordings. Ethan, who had stood silently near the doorway the entire time, looked from his daughter to the specialists. "Well?" he asked. Dr. Voss closed her tablet. "There is measurable improvement in both sensory response and reflexive movement compared to her baseline scans from 3 months ago. It's not dramatic, but it's significant. Whoever has been working with her has clearly helped her surpass what we would expect at this stage." Ethan's gaze flicked briefly toward Maya before returning to the doctor. "And your recommendation?" "Continue whatever you're doing," Dr. Voss replied. "It's working." The words hung in the air like sunlight breaking through cloud. Maya didn't gloat. She simply rested her hand lightly on Emily's shoulder, feeling the girl lean into the touch. For Ethan, the moment was quiet but seismic. Against all the noise, all the whispers, all the doubt, here was confirmation not just of progress, but of possibility. And for the first time since Maya had entered his home, he felt something more than reluctant acceptance. He felt the beginnings of trust. The day after the Northridge evaluation, the atmosphere in the Blackwell estate shifted in ways that were subtle but undeniable. The staff still moved with the same practiced efficiency. The tall windows still framed the same manicured gardens, and the scent of polished wood and roses still lingered in the halls, but beneath that surface calm, there was a looseness, a gentler rhythm, as though an invisible weight had been shifted off the household's spine. The official report had left no room for doubt. Emily's progress was real, measurable, and significant. For Maya, it was a quiet vindication. She had never been chasing recognition, but there was a deep satisfaction in knowing that the child's improvement had been validated not only by instinct and observation, but by hard data from a team no one in Ethan's world could dismiss. Yet she also knew this was not the end of any battle. It was, at best, the end of the first skirmish. Trust in this house was not a gift handed freely. It was earned in inches, and she had learned how quickly those inches could be taken back. Emily, on the other hand, seemed almost buoyant that morning. She greeted Maya with a smile that was less cautious than usual, her brown eyes lit with a spark that hadn't been there weeks ago. "Did you hear what Dr. Voss said?" she asked over breakfast, her voice low but brimming with excitement. "She said I'm doing better than they thought I could." Maya smiled as she spread jam across a piece of toast for her. "I heard, and I hope you believe it." Emily nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "I do, because it's true. I can feel it. My legs feel more awake." The phrase stayed with Maya long after. The simple purity of a child describing something so profound in such plain words. Ethan had remained quiet after the evaluation, neither offering praise nor criticism. That wasn't unusual for him. His way of processing things was inward, locked behind that measured facade. But late in the afternoon, Maya caught sight of him in the garden, leaning slightly on the carved stone railing as he watched Emily through the open conservatory doors. The girl was laughing softly at something Ruth had said, her hands resting on her lap, her posture more upright than it had been in months. There was no performance in her joy, no attempt to prove anything. Ethan's gaze lingered on her in a way that suggested he was seeing his daughter, not the patient, not the responsibility, but the child he had once lifted high above his head in play. Later that evening, as the light turned amber and the house began to quiet, Maya was in the kitchen making a cup of chamomile tea when Ethan stepped in. It was rare to see him here. Meals for him were usually brought to his study or taken in the formal dining room. He didn't speak at first, simply watching her stir the tea. "You were right," he said finally, his voice low and even. Maya turned, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. "About the evaluation," he continued. "I didn't want to admit it, but I needed them to confirm what I was seeing. Not because I didn't trust you, but because—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because I've been afraid to believe in anything I couldn't control." Maya let the silence breathe for a moment before answering. "Control can be a good thing," she said softly, "but sometimes it's just a cage we build for ourselves. Emily doesn't need a cage. She needs room to grow." Ethan's eyes met hers, and for once there was no sharp edge in them, only thoughtfulness. "You've done more for her in weeks than I could in years," he said. "That's not easy for a father to admit." The words hung between them, honest and unpolished. She didn't try to soften them with platitudes. "I haven't done this alone," she said instead. "She's been doing the hardest work herself. I just give her the tools to try." The following days brought a steady, almost imperceptible climb in Emily's progress. She could identify sensations in her lower legs more consistently now, and once, in a moment that made Maya's breath catch, she managed to curl her toes for nearly a full second. It was an action so small that most would overlook it, but Maya knew how much it meant. Emily knew too, grinning shyly afterward as if she'd just unlocked a secret. Ruth noticed these changes with quiet pride, though she made a point never to gloat in front of Ethan. She understood that his acceptance of Maya's role was still fragile, and she had no intention of letting Lucille or anyone else stir the embers of doubt again. But Lucille had her own rhythm, and it was one that thrived on the undercurrent of tension. She hadn't spoken openly against Maya since the evaluation, but her disapproval was written in the clipped tone of her greetings, in the way she rearranged schedules without consulting Maya, in the subtle exclusion from certain household discussions. Maya recognized it for what it was, an attempt to reassert control. She didn't challenge it directly. She simply adjusted, finding new ways to work with Emily in the spaces left to her. And perhaps that adaptability was what made her presence even harder for Lucille to dislodge one crisp afternoon. When the air outside smelled faintly of wood smoke from a neighboring estate, Maya decided to take Emily out into the garden for a change of scenery during their session. They rolled along the gravel paths, past the rose bush stripped of their blooms, toward a secluded bench beneath an archway of ivy. "I like it out here," Emily said, her voice relaxed. "It feels open, like I can breathe better." Maya knelt beside her, adjusting a blanket over her lap. "Sometimes a change of place can change how we feel about ourselves," she said. "It reminds us that the world is bigger than our problems." They worked quietly for nearly half an hour, focusing on gentle nerve stimulation and light muscle activation. The wind rustled the ivy above, scattering a few leaves across Emily's lap. At one point, Emily closed her eyes and whispered, "I can feel the cold on my toes." Maya's chest tightened with a mixture of pride and protectiveness. "Hold onto that feeling," she said. "It's your body waking up." Neither of them realized that Ethan had been watching from a distance, standing just beyond the archway. He didn't interrupt, didn't make his presence known. He simply observed, taking in the quiet ease between them, the patience in Maya's voice, the way Emily's smile seemed so unforced here. Outside the constraints of the formal therapy rooms, later, when they returned to the house, he walked with them for a part of the way, listening as Emily recounted what she had felt. He didn't say much, but his presence alongside them spoke volumes. That night, long after the house had gone. Still, Ethan found himself in his study again, the fire casting warm light across the shelves. He thought of how far they had come from those first tense days, when every interaction felt like a battle for territory. Now the battles seemed fewer, and in their place were moments small, fragile, but real where trust took root. He didn't know where this path would lead or how long it would last, but for the first time in years, he was willing to let the unknown in. And as he glanced toward the hall where Emily's laughter had echoed earlier, he realized he wasn't just fighting for her recovery anymore, he was fighting for the life that... The first frost of the season arrived overnight, leaving a thin silver sheen across the lawns and turning the garden paths brittle underfoot. The Blackwell estate, always immaculate, seemed to hold its breath in the early morning stillness. Inside, the air was warmer, but just as still, the kind of silence that hinted at conversations waiting to happen. Maya woke before the rest of the house, as she often did, pulling on a sweater over her uniform and padding quietly down the servants' corridor toward the kitchen. She liked these early hours. The clatter of breakfast preparation had yet to begin, and the world outside the tall windows was a soft, muted gray. She brewed tea and opened her notebook, reviewing Emily's progress with the same meticulous care she had since the day she arrived. But today there was an added sense of urgency in her pen strokes. The evaluation had bought her time and credibility, but she could feel the undercurrents shifting again. In this house, moments of peace were never without shadow. By mid-morning, Ruth had summoned her to the sunroom. The older woman sat with a wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You've made remarkable headway with Emily," Ruth said without preamble, pouring tea into delicate china cups. "But you should be aware when progress is visible, it attracts attention. Not all of it good." Maya accepted the cup, noting the weight behind the words. "You mean Lucille?" she said quietly. Ruth's mouth curved in the faintest smile. "Lucille has her own vision of order. You've disrupted it. She sees you as unpredictable. And unpredictability to her is a liability." Maya took a sip of tea, letting the warmth steady her. "Emily isn't a liability," she said firmly. "She's a person who needs more than routines and protocols. She needs to know someone believes in her." Ruth's gaze softened. "You don't have to convince me, dear, but be careful. In this house, winning a battle doesn't always mean you've won the war." That afternoon, Ethan hosted a private luncheon with 2 members of the Foundation's board, both old acquaintances of his late wife. The event was meant to be low-key, but Maya quickly realized it was anything but. Lucille was present, her posture perfect, her eyes flicking toward Maya whenever she passed through the room. The board members were polite, but there was a subtle, probing quality to their questions about Emily's therapy, about who was working with her, about whether Ethan had considered bringing in more formal care. Maya wasn't meant to be part of the conversation, but when Emily wheeled herself in midway through, the dynamic shifted. The girl greeted Maya first, with a warmth that made one of the guests raise an eyebrow. "We worked in the garden today," Emily said brightly, as if unaware of the undercurrent. I felt the cold on my toes. The statement was innocent, but it hung in the air like a challenge to every skeptical voice in the room. Later, after the luncheon ended, Ethan found Maya in the conservatory, tidying the cushions on the window seats. "They asked about you," he said without looking up from the phone in his hand. Maya paused, unsure if he meant it as a warning or an observation. "And what did you tell them?" she asked. "The truth," he replied. "That Emily is improving and that your work is part of it." His tone was matter-of-fact, but there was a certain weight behind the words, as if he had chosen to defend her in a room where it would have been easier not to. She met his gaze briefly, offering a nod of gratitude she didn't put into words. The days that followed, the estate's routine began to subtly change. Ethan started joining Emily and Maya during certain sessions, not to interfere, but to observe. He asked questions, not the perfunctory kind, but genuine ones about technique and how Emily's body was responding. Sometimes he stayed longer than planned, watching as Emily tried to flex her foot or identify textures with her toes. He didn't say much during these moments, but the way he lingered spoke volumes. For Emily, having her father there seemed to add another layer of determination. For Maya, it was a sign that perhaps the wall between them was beginning to lower, brick by brick, but the slow thaw didn't go unnoticed by Lucille. One evening, as Maya was leaving Emily's room, Lucille intercepted her in the hallway. Her voice was calm, but her eyes carried the cold precision of someone delivering a calculated blow. "I've seen this before," she said. "A caregiver becoming too important. Too personal. It never ends well." Maya kept her voice even. "Emily's progress isn't about me. It's about her willingness to try again." Lucille's lips tightened. "You think that matters to the world outside these walls?" They see proximity, not purpose. And when they start to talk, it's the child who pays the price. Without waiting for a reply, she turned and walked away, leaving the words to settle like frost. That night, Maya sat at the small desk in her quarters, staring at the open page of her notebook without writing. Lucille's warning was not new. She had heard variations of it before in other households, in other jobs. But here it felt different, heavier, because she knew how fragile Emily's gains were and how quickly trust could be shattered if the wrong people decided she didn't belong. Still, retreat had never been her instinct. She decided silently that she would not step back, not unless Emily herself asked her to. The following week brought an unexpected twist. Ethan informed Maya that the Foundation's Winter Gala, an event far grander than the recent fundraiser, would be held in December. This one would draw not just donors and medical professionals, but politicians, press, and social figures from across the state. "It's important for the Foundation's visibility," he explained, his tone more formal than usual. "But it also means scrutiny of me, of Emily, and by extension of you." Maya listened carefully, understanding that he was offering both information and a test. "Do you want me there?" she asked. "Emily will," he said simply. That's reason enough." From that point on, the weeks seemed to gather speed. Therapy sessions became more structured, but Maya still wove in moments of play and discovery, having Emily paint with her toes, roll over textured mats, even press her feet into cool water to identify temperature. Each new sensation Emily could name was a victory, and she began keeping her own small journal of progress. Ethan noticed and said nothing, but the faint pride in his eyes was unmistakable. Ruth, ever the quiet strategist, made sure Maya had what she needed without drawing attention to her involvement. Lucille, however, seemed to be waiting for the smallest misstep. It was on a late afternoon in mid-November, with the sun setting in a blaze of copper light, that a new challenge arrived, not from within the estate, but from outside. A well-known society columnist, known for her talent in stirring intrigue, published a feature on the Blackwell family's quiet return to the social stage. The piece was flattering in parts, but it included a photograph from the earlier fundraiser, the same one that had sparked whispers, paired with a line speculating about the enigmatic woman whose influence on the young heiress seems both profound and personal. Within hours, the article was circulating among the Foundation's donors and acquaintances, its language carefully crafted to invite curiosity without making outright accusations. When Maya saw it, she felt the familiar knot of dread in her stomach. She knew how quickly such narratives could spiral, how easily a story could become a weapon in the wrong hands. She found Ethan in the study, reading the same article on his tablet. His expression was unreadable, but his jaw was set. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he set the tablet down, met her gaze, and said quietly, "They'll talk. Let them. What matters is what we do next." The weeks leading to the Winter Gala passed like a slow-burning fuse, every day building toward an event that felt less like a celebration and more like a trial. The estate hummed with preparations, florists arriving with crates of white winter roses, decorators mapping the lighting across the ballroom's vaulted ceiling, caterers tasting and retasting the carefully curated menu. Ruth oversaw much of the work with her usual quiet authority, but this time Lucille's influence was unmistakable. Seating charts were adjusted repeatedly, conversations between staff would halt abruptly when Maya entered a room, and subtle reminders of proper appearance began surfacing in the most unexpected places, little barbs disguised as helpful suggestions. The message was clear. The gala was not just about the foundation's cause. It was also a stage, and every person allowed in the spotlight would be measured, weighed, and judged. For Maya, the days were split between her time with Emily and the undercurrent of tension that seemed to tighten as the gala approached. Emily was excited about the event in a way that made Maya's heart ache. She spoke about wearing the silver gown her mother had once chosen for her, about showing the people who had not seen her in months that she was not just a chair, as she put it. Maya helped her prepare discreetly, integrating therapy exercises into dress rehearsals so Emily could hold her posture longer, keep her head high, and project the confidence she felt growing inside. Every time Emily managed to maintain a seated balance without shifting for more than a minute, they celebrated it like a small miracle. But Maya also knew that beyond the applause of strangers, there would be eyes searching for flaws, people who might see Emily's progress not as triumph, but as an opportunity to question the legitimacy of the woman standing at her side. 2 days before the gala, Ethan called Maya into his study. The afternoon light fell in slanted beams across the desk, catching in the dust motes that drifted lazily through the air. He was reviewing a series of printed photographs, publicity shots for the event, and without looking up, he said, "You'll be there." It was not phrased as a question. Maya paused in the doorway. "If Emily wants me there, then yes," she replied evenly. He set the photos down and met her eyes. "She does. But you should know, there will be press, more than last time. And the people attending, they live on whispers and reputation. If anyone decides to make you the story, it could distract from the foundation's work." Maya stepped into the room, her voice steady. "Do you want me to fade into the background?" His gaze held hers for a long moment. "No, I want you to stand exactly where Emily needs you. Just be ready." She nodded once. "I've been ready since the day I met her." Something shifted in his expression, not a smile, but the faintest softening, as if he understood she was speaking about more than just the gala. The evening of the event arrived with the first true snow of the season. By sunset, the estate was a vision of winter elegance, the driveway lined with lanterns casting pools of golden light onto the fresh white ground, the ballroom transformed into a world of crystal chandeliers, evergreen garlands, and the muted gleam of silver place settings. Guests arrived in a steady stream, politicians in tailored suits, women in gowns that swept the floor, faces from glossy magazines mingling with those from medical journals. The hum of polite conversation filled the air, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the clink of champagne flutes. Maya stayed upstairs with Emily until the main speeches were set to begin, helping her adjust the silver gown so it fell perfectly over her chair, tucking a small lavender sachet into the pocket to calm her nerves. When they entered the ballroom, a ripple of attention followed them, not loud, but perceptible. Maya kept her focus on Emily, guiding her through the crowd with quiet confidence, her hand light on the chair's handle. Ethan, already near the stage, looked toward them, and for a brief second their eyes met across the room. There was no hesitation in his acknowledgement. He gave a short nod, a silent signal that she belonged there. When Ethan took the stage to speak, the room stilled. He welcomed the guests, thanked the donors, and spoke of the foundation's mission with the practiced eloquence of a man used to commanding a room. But then, in a move that seemed to surprise even some of the board members seated near the front, he shifted the focus. "Tonight," he said, "I want to recognize not just the medical advancements we're funding, but the power of human connection in recovery. My daughter has faced challenges that even the best science cannot fully solve. And yet, her spirit has begun to heal, not because of a new procedure, But because of the dedication of someone who refused to see her as limited, his gaze turned toward Maya. Maya Williams has been that person. The applause began politely, then grew stronger, the sound swelling in the grand room. Maya felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, but she kept her expression composed, leaning slightly toward Emily so the girl could share in the moment. Emily's cheeks were flushed with pride, and that alone made every risk worth it. After the speech, the evening unfolded in a blur of introductions and cautious small talk. Some guests were genuinely warm, asking about Emily's progress, while others offered smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Maya handled each interaction with the same calm professionalism, always redirecting the attention toward Emily's achievements. But she noticed Lucille at the periphery, moving between conversations with the precision of someone playing a game whose rules only she knew. It was near the end of the night, when the music had softened and guests had begun drifting toward the exits, that the first hint of trouble surfaced. A photographer from one of the city's most read society columns approached uninvited, angling for a shot of Ethan, Emily, and Maya together. Before Maya could step aside, Ethan placed a hand on the back of Emily's chair and looked directly into the lens. "Go ahead," he said. The flash lit the room for a fraction of a second, but Maya felt its echo ripple outward, knowing that whatever story accompanied that image would be written by someone else's hand later. In the quiet aftermath, Maya and Ethan found themselves alone in the side hall as staff began clearing the ballroom. Snow was still falling out. The photograph appeared less than 48 hours later, not buried inside the society pages but plastered across the front section of one of the most widely read lifestyle publications in the state. It was artfully cropped to highlight the intimacy of the moment. Ethan, tall and immaculately dressed, one hand resting on Emily's silver-clad shoulder, the other on the back of her chair. Emily smiling, poised, radiant. And beside her, Maya, in the navy gown Ruth had insisted she borrow, her posture steady, her eyes focused not on the camera but on the girl she was guiding. The caption was simple but loaded: the Blackwell heiress, and the mystery woman who has captured the family's attention. By mid-morning, the photo had been picked up by 3 more outlets, each adding their own subtle twist to the narrative. Some framed it as an uplifting story of a devoted caregiver helping the young heiress reclaim her life. Others hinted at the unexpected closeness between the billionaire widower and the woman whose background remains largely unknown. Social media was less restrained. Comment threads swelled with speculation, accusations, praise, cynicism. Words like gold digger, hero, opportunist, and angel all appeared within the same conversation, thrown about by people who had never met any of them. The internet had no interest in nuance. Inside the estate, the impact was immediate. The phones at the foundation's office began ringing with calls from donors, some offering congratulations, others inquiring pointedly about the role Maya played in Emily's life. The board members were divided. Half saw the publicity as a chance to humanize the foundation's work. The other half saw it as a dangerous distraction from the organization's mission. Ethan spent the morning in his study, fielding calls and ignoring others, his phone buzzing relentlessly on the desk beside him. Maya learned of the photo not from Ethan but from Ruth, who appeared at her door holding a folded copy of the magazine. "I thought you should see it before someone else shows you," Ruth said, setting it gently on the desk. Maya studied the image for a long moment. It wasn't the picture itself that bothered her. She could see the truth in Emily's expression, the comfort in her posture, but she knew how easily the world could take a moment born of care and twist it into a spectacle. "Lucille had a hand in this, didn't she?" she asked quietly. Ruth's expression was unreadable. "Let's just say she understands the currency of perception." By midday, the mood in the house had shifted. Staff, who had once greeted Maya warmly, now seemed cautious, their interactions clipped and formal. A few avoided her altogether, as though proximity might pull them into whatever storm the photograph had conjured. Emily noticed, of course. "Why is everyone acting like they swallowed something sour?" she asked while Maya adjusted the blanket over her legs during their afternoon session. "They're just surprised," Maya said carefully. Sometimes people don't know how to behave when they think they've learned something new about someone. Emily frowned. But they didn't learn anything new? You're still you? The simple clarity of that made Maya's throat tighten. Yes, she said softly, I am. That evening, Ethan finally sought her out. She was in the conservatory, closing the shutters against the cold. He entered without preamble, his jaw set but his eyes searching. You've seen it, he said. She nodded. And the fallout? He added. Enough to notice, she replied. Some of it's kind, some of it's cruel, all of it's noise. He exhaled slowly, leaning against the doorframe. I could issue a statement, shut it down before it spins further. Maya turned to face him fully. And what would that statement say? That I'm just an employee? That I don't matter to Emily beyond my job description? His gaze sharpened. You think that's what I want? She held his eyes, unflinching. I think you've spent so long controlling the story that you're afraid of letting the truth speak for itself. For a long moment, they stood in silence. The air between them taut. Then Ethan said, The truth is complicated, and the world doesn't care about complicated. Maya's voice was steady but quiet. Maybe not, but Emily does. And so do I. The days that followed became a quiet siege. Invitations to foundation events were suddenly postponed or rescheduled. Meetings Maya would normally be included in went on without her. Lucille's presence became sharper, her words more clipped, as though the photograph had given her unspoken permission to tighten her grip on the household's image. But Maya refused to retreat. She threw herself into Emily's therapy, devising new exercises, keeping detailed notes, celebrating each new flicker of movement with unshakable positive. It was during one of these sessions, on a snowy afternoon when the world outside the windows was a blur of white, that Emily managed to lift her left foot an inch off the footrest for the first time since the accident. The movement was small, shaky, but undeniable. Maya's gasp of joy made Emily laugh, a clear, bright sound that carried down the hall. Ruth appeared in the doorway, drawn by the laughter, and when she saw what had happened, she smiled in quiet triumph. You'd think she'd won a marathon, Ethan said from behind her, his tone dry but his eyes betraying something else entirely. She did, Maya replied without looking up. One step at a time. That night, Ethan made a decision. He called the Foundation's communications director and instructed them to prepare a statement not to deny the photograph, but to frame it. The message was simple. Emily Blackwell's recovery has been supported by a dedicated team, and among them, caregiver Maya Williams has played an invaluable role. Her commitment and care are integral to Emily's progress, and we are grateful for her presence in our lives. It was not a declaration of anything more, but it was enough to shift the tone. When the statement was released the next morning, reactions were mixed, but the tide of speculation began to ebb. The cruelty in the comments lessened. The praise grew louder. Some even began to focus less on the imagined scandal and more on the remarkable recovery Emily was making. For Maya, it wasn't a victory in the way most people would measure it. She knew the whispers would never fully stop, that in some circles she would always be the mystery woman. But as she wheeled Emily out into the garden that afternoon, watching her breathe in the crisp winter air with a smile, she realized the only audience that mattered was right here. Inside, however, Lucille was already recalculating. Public perception might have softened, but in her mind, this was far from over. And she had no intention of letting Maya's place in the Blackwell household become permanent. Winter settled deep over the Blackwell estate, the snow no longer a fleeting decoration, but a constant white presence that softened the grounds and muffled the world beyond the gates. Inside, the house seemed warmer than it had in months not. In temperature, but in tone? Emily's laughter was heard more often. Ethan's footsteps in the hallway came with less of that heavy, distant pace, and Maya moved through the rooms without the constant sensation of being an intruder. Yet underneath this slow transformation, an old tension remained, quiet but unrelenting, like a river running under ice. Lucille's watchful presence was as constant as the winter air, and though she no longer made overt attempts to discredit Maya in front of Ethan, her methods had shifted into something far more deliberate, calculated patience, waiting for the right opportunity to strike. That opportunity arrived sooner than anyone expected. The foundation had scheduled an important closed-door meeting with several high-profile donors who were considering funding a new wing at the Northridge Rehabilitation Center in Emily's name. The project could potentially reshape not only the foundation's reach, but also cement Ethan's standing in the philanthropic world for years to come. The meeting was to be held at the estate for privacy, and Emily had expressed a clear wish to attend, not as a silent figure in a corner, but as a visible testament to the progress she had made. Ethan agreed, albeit cautiously, knowing how much seeing her could sway donors. The night before the meeting, Maya spent extra hours working with Emily, rehearsing posture, breathing, and steadying techniques so the girl could sit through the long discussion without fatigue. They shared soft laughter over small mishaps, Emily dropping a pen and making a game out of trying to pick it up with her foot, Maya's exaggerated trainer voice when encouraging her. It was one of those rare evenings where the rest of the world seemed to fade away, but in another wing of the house, Lucille was finalizing her own plan. She had arranged for a new in-home specialist, a polished, impeccably credentialed therapist from Boston, to arrive unannounced the morning of the meeting under the guise of offering professional oversight for Emily's presentation. On paper, it was an innocent gesture of precaution. In reality, it was designed to create a moment of doubt, to subtly remind Ethan and the donors that Maya was not officially certified, that Emily's care could and perhaps should be handled by someone else. The morning of the meeting dawned pale and still, frost clinging to the edges of the tall windows. The donors arrived in sleek black cars, their coats dusted with snow, their voices low with anticipation. Ethan greeted them in the grand reception room, every inch the composed host, while Emily waited in the adjoining library with Maya. Just as they were about to move into the meeting space, the new therapist appeared, introduced briskly by Lucille. "I thought it best to have an extra layer of professional assurance," Lucille said smoothly, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, but with the guests only a few feet away, he said nothing. The session began with polite formalities, the donors taking their seats around a polished mahogany table, the scent of fresh coffee and cedar mingling in the air. Ethan spoke first, outlining the project's goals, the potential impact, and the vision for the new rehabilitation wing. Then he turned to Emily, who began to speak softly at first, but gaining strength as she shared her story. She spoke of the accident without lingering on pain, of the months of uncertainty, and then with a glance toward Maya, of how someone had made her believe she could try again. It was not a speech crafted by publicists. It was the honest voice of a child who had fought for every small victory. Midway through, the new therapist interrupted gently but firmly, suggesting Emily adjust her position and attempting to guide her posture with brisk, clinical hands. Emily stiffened, the connection to her own words broken, and her gaze darted toward Maya. Maya, still seated at the far side of the table, caught that look, a flash of discomfort, of silent pleading. She rose slowly, moving to Emily's side, her voice calm but steady. "She's fine as she is," Maya said, adjusting the girl's blanket with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the therapist's efficiency. "Emily knows her own limits better than anyone." There was a moment's pause, a subtle shift in the room. The donors, watching closely, saw not just two different methods but two entirely different approaches to care. Ethan saw it too, the way Emily's shoulders eased under Maya's touch, the way her voice steadied again as she continued speaking. By the time she finished, there was a quiet in the room that spoke louder than any applause could. When the donors departed, their commitments to the project secured, Ethan asked Maya to join him in the study. Lucille was there as well, standing near the fireplace, her expression carefully neutral. "That was not what we discussed," Lucille began before Ethan could speak. You undermine the structure of the presentation. No, Ethan interrupted, his voice sharper than Maya had ever heard it in Lucille's presence. What I saw was someone protecting my daughter from being reduced to a performance. He turned fully toward Lucille. You've made it clear you think Maya is a liability. But today proved exactly the opposite. She's not just helping Emily walk again, she's helping her speak for herself. That's worth more than any degree on a wall. Lucille's lips thinned, but she said nothing. Ethan's attention shifted to Maya. I should have made this clear long ago. You're not here on probation anymore. You're here because you belong here. And as long as Emily wants you in her life, you'll have a place in this house. It was not flowery, not dressed in sentiment, but for Maya, it was more than enough. Later that evening, as snow began to fall again in slow, deliberate flakes, she sat with Emily in the conservatory, the room glowing with the soft light of the fire. Emily was tired but happy, her head resting lightly